Hi everyone. This is my first follow-up on the Moses sermon, but there may be two. The story of Moses is of course set in Egypt and related areas such as the Sinai, and we all know of the intense interest that has always been shown in the history of ancient Egypt. There will be few of us that can be totally unaware of the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun, for example, and how that gripped the world in the 1920s. Some of you may have seen the exhibition when it came to London, and I was fortunate to see it in Cairo when I was a boy of 12. There are many aspects of study, archaeology, anthropology, and biblical scholarship, to name but three, that show light on that ancient world, and contrary to what some doubters would wish, support the veracity of these biblical stories and give them context. Here are one or two aspects. If this is a bit long-winded, please feel free to pause and return as you wish. Moses, the baby in the bulrushes. Moses is an Egyptian name, and there were at least two, if not three, pharaohs called Thutmoses. Despite the importance of the earlier patriarchs which we have looked at, in the study of religions, it is Moses who is credited as the founder or the father of Judaism. Ironically, a man with an Egyptian name. A major finding of modern biblical scholarship is the extent to which the narrative in the book of Exodus is informed by the ancient Israelites' knowledge of Egyptian culture, religion, and literature. The birth story of Moses in Exodus 2 verses 1 to 10 provides an excellent illustration of both the extent of and the transformation involved in such borrowing. One of the core myths of ancient Egypt concerned the gods Seth, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Seth and Osiris were brother deities, the former representing evil and chaos, the latter representing good and fertility. The battle between the two resulted in the death of Osiris, but before he died, Osiris had impregnated his wife Isis, goddess of wisdom and beauty. Isis in turn gave birth to Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship. When Seth learned that his brother Osiris's offspring had been born, he sought to kill the baby Horus. Isis prepared a basket of reeds to hide him in the marshland of the Nile Delta, where she suckled him and protected him along with the watchful eye of her sister Nephthys from the snakes and scorpions and other dangerous creatures until he grew and prospered. Scholars have noted that the birth story of Moses is part of a larger motif of ancient literature, namely the exposed infant motif. The ancients delighted in telling tales of their heroic leaders who at birth were exposed to nature, usually by their parents who, for one reason or another, did not desire their newborn sons. Among the most famous accounts are the stories of Oedipus from Greece and Romulus and Remus from Rome, along with a less well-known but equally important story of Sargon of Akkad in ancient Mesopotamia. There is a difference, however, between the Moses story and the other exposed infancy narratives, for in Exodus chapter 2, the goal of Moses' mother is not to be rid of the child, but to save him. This occurs elsewhere in ancient literature only in the story of the baby Horus, whose mother Isis sought to protect him from his wicked uncle Seth. The Hebrew and Egyptian stories share this crucial feature, which is lacking in the other parallels, and therefore beckon us to read the former in the light of the latter. The list of specific features shared by the two accounts is truly remarkable. In both stories, it is the mother who is the active parent. In the Egyptian version, Osiris is dead, and in the Hebrew account, Moses' father is only mentioned in passing in Exodus 2:1, after which the role of the mother is highlighted. Both mothers construct a small vessel of reeds and place the baby in the marshlands of the delta. In both accounts, another female relative watches over the baby, Nephthys in the Horus story and Miriam in the biblical account. Significantly, in both stories, the mother's suckling of the child is emphasized. Isis's nursing of the baby Horus is a prominent feature of the Egyptian artwork, which many statues portraying this action, while in the biblical story, Miriam arranges for Moses' mother to nurse the child. Most importantly, in both stories, the baby is hidden and protected from the wicked machinations of the villain. The fact noted briefly above that Horus is the god of kingship is of critical importance. It means that every pharaoh was considered the living embodiment of Horus. Egyptian artwork helps illustrate the point, since a number of statues depict individual pharaohs with Horus behind them and the wings of the falcon coming forward and enveloping the king. In such artistic portrayals, the pharaoh and Horus become one, as indeed they were in the mindset of ancient Egyptians. Thus, if Moses is the baby in the bulrushes in the biblical account, he has become, as it were, Horus, and thus the equivalent of the pharaoh. And if the pharaoh of the biblical account is the one who commands that Hebrew baby boys be drowned in the Nile, and who by extension seeks the death of the baby Moses, then he has been transformed into the wicked Seth. The biblical author, in short, subverts the foundational myth of ancient Egypt by portraying Moses as the good Horus and by converting the pharaoh into the wicked Seth. Such subversions are typical of the manner in which a weaker people, in our case ancient Israel, gain power, as it were, over the stronger nation, in our case ancient Egypt. The story of Moses' birth implies that not only did the author of our text possess a thorough knowledge of ancient Egyptian culture, religion and literature, but that his audience, or at least a significant portion of it, did as well. One can imagine the ancient Israelite reader, conversant with all matters Egyptian, delighting in such a tale portraying Moses, and not Horus or the Pharaoh, as the hero, and depicting the Pharaoh not as the good force but as the evil force identified with Seth. Incidentally, there is apparently evidence of Isis worship throughout Europe and even in the British Isles. Second point, some of us might find it strange that during these sermons and studies we hear of numerous people other than the patriarchs and their tribes owning a knowledge of the Lord. For example, we hear Abimelech refer to him when discussing the matter of the deceit regarding Abram and Isaac's wife. Laban, when he pursues Jacob, also owns a knowledge and message from the Lord. Similarly, when we read this Moses story, we find that Moses flees and eventually settles with the family of Jethro, a priest of Midian. So how was it that he, not being an Israelite, knew and worshipped God? What is less well known is that Tutankhamun's father, Pharaoh Akhenaten, actually abandoned the traditional Egyptian religion mentioned above and set up a whole new city with temples to worship of just one god, Amun-Ra, the sun god, possibly the first flash of monotheism, worship of one god, in the ancient world. It should not surprise us, therefore, that in the midst of this pagan polytheism, worship of many gods, the one God is working his purposes, and not just through the Israelites. One must also assume that the Ishmaelites or Arabs were also worshipping the one God in some form, and the Prophet Muhammad was born into that culture. Thirdly, skeptics of the Bible often say that there is no Egyptian records of the Israelites having ever been in Egypt. But why would there be? Succeeding pharaohs, particularly if they were starting a new dynasty, often obliterated the history of their predecessors. That is why there was little or no record of Tutankhamun or his family. It had been erased, and Howard Carter searched for the tomb more on a hunch than any concrete record. And even today, almost all we know of Tutankhamun is gleaned from his mummy and from the tomb itself. The Egyptians were not going to own up to a ragtag tribe of Hebrews who ended up escaping and drowning their king and his chariots in the sea. In contrast to that, however, there is actually a huge amount of archaeological evidence to support the presence of Hebrews or Semites in Egypt, and especially so in the Sinai, where many were involved in mining. We might also bear in mind that Egyptian history does record many wars between Egypt and other nations such as Syria, Assyria, and Babylon, often affecting Canaan and Judea or Israel. And the Bible often refers to these by saying things like, "And the king of Egypt came up," etc., etc. Anyway, to be continued.